All right, so today we're going to be diving into closing costs, that fun part of buying or selling a house. And we're going to be focusing specifically on Broward County, Florida. We've got a really great guide from Antonio Ortega, LLC. He's a local expert, and he's going to help us kind of figure out how to deal with this, because it can be a little bit scary.
Yeah, it can be. It's kind of like the hidden part of the iceberg, you know? Everyone knows it's there, but sometimes you forget about it until it's too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
So let's kind of break it down. What exactly are closing costs, and why should we even care about them so much?
Well, closing costs are basically like the final expenses you pay. When the ownership of a property officially changes hands, it's like all the behind-the-scenes stuff, processing your loan, title insurance, making sure all the legal documents are in order, all that stuff.
So it's not just like handing over the keys and
It's, yep,
celebrate. There's like a whole financial dance going on here.
exactly. And just like any good bands, you need to know the steps. And Antonio, being a licensed real estate professional right here in Broward County, he really knows how to lead you through it.
Awesome. So let's talk numbers. What kind of costs are buyers typically looking at in Broward County?
Well, for buyers, you're generally going to be looking at somewhere between 2 and 5% of the home's purchase price. Now, that might not seem like a lot at first, but let's think about it. Imagine you're buying a $300,000 house.
That's the dream, right?
Right. Well, in that case, you could be looking at closing costs anywhere between $6,000 and $15,000.
Ooh, that's not pocket change.
No, it's not.
So what are some of those specific fees that buyers should be prepared for?
Well, first you got loan origination fees. That's basically the lender's fee for processing and underwriting your mortgage. That's usually about 1% of the loan amount. Then there's title search and insurance. That protects you from any nasty surprises down the road, like somebody else coming along and saying, oh, I own this property.
So that seems like a pretty worthwhile investment.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, you've got the appraisal, which makes sure that the home's value actually matches the price that you're paying. And then a home inspection, just to make sure that you're not buying a house full of problems.
All right. So lots of fees, lots to keep in mind. Now, what about sellers? Do they escape the closing cost dance?
Not quite. In fact, sellers in Broward County often face even higher closing costs. You're typically looking at somewhere between 6 and 10% of the sale price.
Okay, so that's significant. Why are seller costs so much higher?
Well, the biggest chunk usually comes from those real estate agent commissions. That can be anywhere from 5 to 6% of the sale price. And that gets split between the buyers and sellers agents. Then on top of that, sellers usually cover the buyer's title insurance and a state tax called the documentary stamp tax.
Wait, so the seller pays for the buyer's title insurance?
Yep. It's one of those things that a lot of people don't realize.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So on that same $300,000 house that we talked about earlier, sellers could be paying somewhere between $18,000 and $30,000 in closing costs.
That's exactly right. It's really important for sellers to understand those expenses up front.
Yeah.
And factor them into their strategy. It's not just about setting a listing price. It's about knowing what you're actually going to walk away with at the end.
Right. It makes sense. So you've mentioned Antonio Ortega, LLC, our local expert. What does he bring to the table?
Well, Antonio's got a great reputation. He's really experienced in the Broward County market, and he's known for guiding his clients smoothly through every step of the process, especially when it comes to these tricky closing costs.
So he's not just about getting the deal done. He's about making sure his clients are informed and protected.
Exactly. And what's really impressive is that Antonio actually contributes 10% of his professional fee towards his clients' closing costs.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's really committed to helping his clients save money. All right, so let's do a quick recap. Closing costs are a big deal. They can really add up, especially here in Broward County. Buyers are looking at 2 to 5% of that home price. Sellers could be as much as 6 to 10%. They cover all sorts of things. Loan processing, title insurance. And the good news is they can be negotiated.
Yep. It's really important to understand these costs up front. Budget effectively, negotiate strategically, and avoid those last-minute surprises.
Absolutely. Now, for our listeners who want to kind of dive deeper into this and learn more about how Antonio Ortega LLC can help them save money, where should they go?
Head over to AntonioOrtegaLLC.com.
Awesome. You'll find all the information you need there.
Definitely.
All right, so stay tuned for part 2. We're going to unpack even more insights into closing costs and give you some specific tips for saving money. So welcome back to our deep dive into closing costs. We've been talking about those general costs. For buyers and sellers, I want to kind of dig into some of the specific fees that Antonio mentions in his guide. One that kind of caught my eye was that documentary stamp tax. that sellers usually end up covering. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so that's a state tax that's applied to any transfer of property. And here in Florida, the rate is 70 cents for every $100 of the sale price.
Okay, so if we're thinking about that $300,000 house, that means that tax alone would be like $2,100.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just one example of a closing cost that's directly tied to that sale price. So it's no wonder that those seller costs can easily get up to 6 to 10%.
Right. Now, Antonio also mentions HOA fees and estoppel certificates as potential costs for sellers. What are those?
Right. So if a property is part of a homeowners association, an HOA, the seller might need to settle any outstanding dues or fees before closing. And that's where that estoppel certificate comes in. It basically verifies that the seller's account is in good standing with the HOA.
So it's like a clean bill of health from the HOA, making sure that everything's all squared away before that new owner takes over.
Exactly. And those certificates usually cost a couple $100. So just another little thing to keep in mind.
Okay. So we've been talking about these costs adding up, but Antonio also really emphasizes that closing costs are negotiable. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Both buyers and sellers have some leverage here. A motivated buyer might offer to cover a portion of the seller's closing costs.
Yeah.
Just to sweeten the deal a little bit.
Right. And a motivated seller might be willing to agree to that, to make their property more attractive.
Exactly. It's all about finding that win-win. And that's where having a skilled agent like Antonio on your side can really make a difference. He can guide you through that whole negotiation process and help you figure out the best strategies to potentially minimize your expenses.
Yeah, because it's not just about finding the house. It's about all of these financial complexities that come along with it.
Definitely.
And having someone like Antonio in your corner can really give you peace of mind.
For sure.
And speaking of finding ways to save, don't forget about Antonio's offer to contribute 10% of his professional fee towards closing costs.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Like a big deal.
Yeah, it really shows his dedication to helping his clients.
So for our listeners out there in Broward County who are ready to buy or sell, what should they do?
Go to AntonioOrtegalLLC.com.
Awesome. You'll find everything you need there.
Definitely.
All right, so stay tuned for part 3. We're going to wrap things up. Some final thoughts and some actionable tips.
This is good. Welcome back to our deep dive, into closing costs. We've covered a lot of ground here, trying to understand what these costs are all about, why they matter, and how we can try and save some money along the way, make it all a little less scary.
Yeah, and I think we've really highlighted, how important it is to have a real estate professional like Antonio Ortega in your corner, someone who can really help you navigate all this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. He's not just about closing that deal. It's about giving his clients the knowledge and resources so they can make the best decisions.
Right, and that's where his commitment to contributing 10% of his fee towards his client's closing costs really comes in. I mean, it shows you how dedicated he is to making sure that the home buying and selling process is as smooth as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of those key takeaways that our listeners should keep in mind as they start their own real estate journey?
Well, I think the biggest thing is knowledge is power. The more you understand about these closing costs, the better prepared you'll be. You can plan, you can budget, you can negotiate effectively. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Shop around for different services, really explore all your options.
Yeah, and as we've talked about,
Yeah.
these costs are often negotiable, so don't be afraid to have those conversations. And having an agent like Antonio can really give you that confidence.
Absolutely. And another really important tip, get pre-approved for a mortgage early on. That'll give you a much clearer picture of what you can actually afford.
Yeah, it's like having that roadmap before you even start the journey. So for our listeners in Broward County who are ready to take that next step, buy or sell a home, how do they connect with Antonio?
Head over to AntonioOrtegalLLC.com.
Awesome. You'll find all the information you need there.
Definitely.
Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See ya.